Let's pray. And now may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all our hearts be now and always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Jesus, on the night that he was betrayed, on the night that he was handed over to suffering and death, on the night he instituted the Holy Eucharist, gave his followers, and you and me, as we're his followers, this new instruction, this mandate, that we are to love one another. That's a pretty strong word, commandment. It carries an imperative with it, leaving no room whatsoever for debate. In other words, you shall do this. Now, Jesus didn't say that we have to like everything, and we don't have to like one another, agree with one another, affirm everything that everyone does. But he did say that we are to love one another. Love, exciting and new. Come aboard, we're expecting you. That word love, of course, is sometimes misunderstood. We think of it in a cultural sense as an intense form of like, but not in the biblical sense. In the biblical sense, love is wrapped up in self-giving and the betterment of the other. Although we may not like everything, we still have to love everyone, in spite of what folks do or say, in spite of whether we think they are worthy or not. Followers of Jesus are to love one another unconditionally. In fact, we're to do this as a witness to the world in order that they may look at us and say, see how these Christians love one another. Now, the Gospel of John doesn't paint Judas Iscariot in a very positive light. In John, Judas is called a thief and a liar. And there's little doubt from the Gospel stories that the disciples had had their fair share of squabbles among themselves, disputes. It wasn't always smooth sailing for the disciples. Those early followers of Jesus had some obvious things in common with one another. But they had great differences as well. Yes, they were all Galileans. Yes, they all spoke the same language. Even shared a similar dialect. But they had things very different. One was a zealot. Another was a tax collector. And that would have placed Simon, the zealot, and Matthew, the tax collector, on very opposite poles of many disputes and many discussions. Today, we would say they would be on opposite poles politically. They would have viewed how to get along or not to get along with the occupying Romans, for instance, quite differently. They came from different work backgrounds. Some of them were fishermen, used to hard labor, the sea, while others would have been used to other pursuits. It was a good thing that Jesus commanded them to love one another, because otherwise the church might not have survived. We could have been dead in the water right from the beginning. And it's a good thing that Jesus commands us to love one another for the same reasons. But why are we even talking about this now? Here we are on the 5th Sunday of Easter, and we're back in John, literally, in the place where Jesus is about to be crucified. Of the 4 Gospels, John spends more time giving what is called the farewell discourses. The other Gospels allude to some of Jesus' final sayings, but John majors on them. John reports how Jesus prepared his followers for that time when he would no longer be with them in the flesh, and established for them in these sayings how they were to be and how they were to function once his departure would be complete. Now, at this point in John, Jesus had given the disciples the definitive impression that things were about to come to a head. The kingdom was at hand, and they thought that the kingdom would be a political one, even though Jesus had instructed that it was something different. They thought that they would gain places of power, prestige, influence, and even affluence. So the major item on their personal agendas was to see what position that they would have in the kingdom. James and John, the Zebedee brothers, had tried to claim the favored positions of honor. On their journey to Jerusalem, they had argued with each other about who was the greatest. So there in the upper room, Jesus took a basin of water, a towel, and began to wash his disciples' feet. A lowly act of service. And suddenly, the mood in the room changed from envy and competition to something else. If there's anybody who shouldn't be on his knees washing other people's feet, it should be Jesus, right? And then Jesus told them that one of them would betray him. Once Judas had gone out to do just that, Jesus gave his disciples this new commandment, that they should love one another. Love one another, just as I have loved you. You should love one another. Imagine being there in that upper room. What would you say after hearing that from Jesus' mouth? I dare say you'd be shocked, especially in the context of betrayal. There must have been a great deal of silence. There are different kinds of silences, aren't there? There's an awkward silence that comes from people, when people just don't have anything to say or don't know exactly how to respond. And there's a silence when words simply can't convey overwhelming thoughts and feelings that you have in the moment. There are other times when anger can create silence. You find yourself perhaps trying to settle yourself down before you speak. I wonder what kind of silence was present in the upper room that night. Whatever it must have been, Jesus broke the silence. Broke that silence by giving this new commandment, to love as he has loved. Jesus, who gave himself for you and for me, for our betterment, for our thriving. We are to be people who do that for one another. But what's new about that? This new commandment that Jesus talks about. What's so new about love? Well, it's about how Jesus has loved us. Forgive me for reducing this to a comic strip, but I think it makes a little bit of point. Remember Peanuts? Lucy and Charlie Brown? You know that. Remember, I grew up on this stuff as a kid. You know that I don't understand. I don't understand love, says Charlie Brown. Who does? Lucy replied. Explain to me, Charlie Brown, what love is. He said, well, I can't explain love. I can recommend a book or a poem or a painting, but I can't explain it. Lucy said, well, try, Charlie Brown, try. So Charlie said, well, let's see. Let's say I see a beautiful, cute little girl walking by. Lucy interrupts. Why does she have to be cute? Why can't someone fall in love with someone with freckles and a big nose? Explain that. Charlie Brown said, well, you're right. Let's just say I see this girl walk by with a great big nose. Lucy shouts, I didn't say great big nose. Hanging his head, which he often did, of course, every time he had to speak to Lucy, Charlie Brown said, not only can you not explain love, you can't even talk about it. Maybe so. Maybe you can't talk about love. But that didn't stop Jesus, did it? Didn't stop Jesus in exercising love. Paul describes this beautifully in his letter to the Philippian church in chapter 2. Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not account equality with God something to be grasped at, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness. And being found in human form, he humbled himself and became obedient even to the point of death, even death on the cross. Just as I have loved you, says Jesus, you should love one another, just as I have loved you. Then Jesus showed them and us what kind of love he means by giving his life for you and for me and all of the world. And Christ calls us to be people who are self-giving for others, for the betterment of others, especially those whom God has called us to love and care for. And when we do that, we can find more and more of what we're actually created to be. And the strange thing, the paradox is, we find a freedom that only the children of God can know. Let's pray. Lord, may we love as Jesus loves us. It's as simple as that, and as hard as that. But help us to be found faithful in trying to do that. And we pray this in Jesus' name.